Well, g'day and welcome again to our Exponential Australia Church Leaders podcast. We are delighted that you are joining us for the second of our national gathering podcast leading into what will be a wonderful time on the Gold Coast in August. We are delighted that you are listening in as we hear from each of our keynote speakers and the many, many other workshop presenters, and really the expression and litmus of what the Lord is doing in the Australian church at the moment as we gather in August. And as I've said, it is a wonderful joy today to have our second keynote speaker join us. We are delighted today to be joined by Pastor Joel Chelliah. Joel is the National President for the ACC. Joel, it is so wonderful, firstly, to have you on this call, but secondly, to be joining with us at conference in August.
Thanks so much, Charlie. I really appreciate this time and looking forward to a great conference.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Joel, it is the second time, firstly, that you have been at conference with us. You were at our inaugural conference in 2023, which is quite incredible. You've been on the podcast before. You are a friend of Exponential, and yet lots has changed in your world since we would have last had you on the podcast. There's been a bit of a shift, bit of a reassignment in terms of the way that you're spending your time. Would love for you, just as we get our conversation started today, just to give us a bit of an update. What's changed in your world?
Well, I think the last time I was there and spoke, we were the state presidents of Western Australia for the ACC, and then we handed that in a year and a bit ago, and now we lead the national executive, so the national leader for the Australian Christian churches across our nation.
Amazing. Joel, what has that meant for a change of season, different capacities, still leading a large multi-site church that is multiplying? That must be a real shift and change in the last 18 months.
Definitely. Look, our church are very kind. They're very releasing. And, we have a wonderful church that has allowed us to step into this new role, but also the whole nation has received us so well, very kindly. I just love our movement. We've got 1,100 and I think 40 churches, if I'm correct, as of the moment. And, great leaders and good things in store for the future.
Amazing. Well, Joel, we're going to get into a whole bunch of things today, particularly around, obviously, you being with us at conference, the session that you will be bringing, and kind of diving into more of like what it means to be our theme for the conference this year is multiplier, how healthy leaders make a lasting impact. And so we're just going to jump into some of your journey and I guess some of the dynamics around that and the things that you're passionate about. And yet, you've obviously raised that you've gone through a transition in this last 18 months as you've kind of stepped into a national apostolic role across your nation as the national president. I would love to just, dive in firstly, because this is all part of what it means to be a healthy leader and kind of being aware of all the things that are going on in our life and ministry. What has that transition been like? And what are you feeling particularly responsible to steward in this season? And as you've stepped into that role, what are you hearing across the Australian Christian churches? What are you hearing across the Pentecostal church at large in Australia? And what are you really seeing, as fresh opportunities as you step into that?
Yeah, look, that's a multi-level question there.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah. I think personally for us, it's required us to become a little bit stricter on our boundaries in regards to making sure that rest and family time and marriage time is there's time for that in the calendar and locked away. That has really been something that we've had to be really strict on. Focusing on what we're supposed to focus on. So constantly going, do we need to be doing that, etc. So that's more on a personal level, so that we can really focus our attention and on what God's called us to. On a national level, I tell you what, there's such stirrings, amongst our Gen Z. We can see a real move of God amongst young people rising up and wanting to not only transform their lives through the gospel, but then wanting to go and being part of the church leadership of the next generation of church coming through. So that's really, really exciting. Obviously, we've got our pressures as well. You know, some churches are aging out, and so there's a great need for transition in that area. The cost of living and staffing has affected a lot of churches, and so they have to become more creative in regards to engaging volunteers and caring for volunteers. So there's a whole heap of different things going on right across the nation. I think there is a fresh focus on regional, like we haven't seen before for a long time, where people are going, hey, listen, we need to start reaching country towns and regional centres, because a lot of the focus have been on major cities in Australia. So there's good things going around all across the nation. And with that comes all these opportunities, right, to make sure that we are hearing what God is saying in this season and actually empowering people to do it.
It's great, Joel. What a time to be alive. What a time to be in Christian leadership. What an opportunity. And I guess diving directly into what your keynote this August is going to be about, because I think it's going to allow us to go in a number of different directions and talk about some of the things that you're passionate about. Your keynote this year is focused on launching church expressions. And of course, that has been something that's been very dear to you as a church planter yourself, being a mother church and sending other churches, leading HarvestNet. For a time, of course, you carried the portfolio with the ACC of the National Church Planting Leader or Coordinator. When you use that language, what do you think that means? And I guess the flip side of that would be, what would be the thing that you see more often than not holds churches back when it comes from launching church expressions? Is it a scarcity? Is it a vision? Is it a fear of failure? It could be a whole raft of things, but what do you see to be the thing that holds churches back? Yeah.
Well, Sharon and I are very passionate about church planting, but not just autonomous church planting, but also campus planting. So we do both. Yes. We're just passionate about getting a new location out, because when you plant a church, we honestly believe you change a community. And so over the years, we've we've done everything we can to support as many as we can to step out in faith and plant a church. What is holding churches back? I think there's two main things that hold people back from planting campuses or churches. The first one is a lack of a discipleship leadership pipeline. And so, they have a great congregation, but people are not discipled and not led into, given an opportunity to truly lead, to be empowered to lead, and then to be released. And so if you don't have a disciple, you won't end up having a leader. And if you don't have a leader, then you won't end up having a church planter or a church pioneer. And so it's just really important that we focus on making sure pipelines are available in every church. I think the other big thing is people are afraid of the cost. There is actually a cost, and it's not so much only financial, but it's the sowing before the reaping. It's the weeping before the tears, of joy, and the weeping before the joy. And so I feel like we have to really remind people that, of course, this is going to hurt. Of course, giving away your best. Of course, sending a whole group of volunteers to build something that doesn't maybe directly come back to your campus or your location is going to hurt. But my goodness, it's so worth it when you see the souls on the other side of your obedience.
It's beautiful. Joel, I wonder particularly as a senior church leader, because of course, the challenge and opportunity of planting churches is both a lack of leaders. It's also potential barriers or blockages that may exist in an ecosystem, in a church, in a denomination. That can, be right across the board. If you were to kind of reframe, church planting as success, or the opportunities for existing church leaders to actually... There's a famous book where I can't remember who wrote it, but the title was Gaining by Losing. So actually to send others out is actually of gain to the kingdom, even though it may feel a personal loss because you've sent out wonderful leaders or you've sent out a big launch team. How would you reframe that to an existing church leader that would love to launch a church expression, but maybe the fear of losing or the insecurities that may surface around, but they're our best leaders. How would you reframe that?
Yeah, look, I think the best way to do it is to inspire people. This week is our 20th anniversary as a church. So,
Praise God.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's very exciting. And one of the things we're doing is obviously going through all the old photos and videos and having a special anniversary ball to bring people back that we've sent out to plant churches. And, as we sit and we think and bring back these people and hear their stories of how they've gone out to plant churches and change communities, I tell you what, it has given me so much joy to realize that our church is not only the members that come to one location or our locations on a Sunday.
Yes.
Because of years of sowing and faithfulness, we now have people in the kingdom of God right across the state, and it overseas as well. And so for me, I can only inspire from my experience and let you know that although those planting moments were painful and costly, and left big gaps in our volunteer armies, etc. It is so worth it when you see churches thriving in communities that would not have existed if you chose to hold everything within your hands. And
so good.
The only way I describe it is in Exodus, there's that passage of scripture where Moses' mother had to put Moses in a basket and release him into that river Nile. And she wasn't releasing him to a basket. She wasn't releasing him into a river. She was releasing him into the hands of God, and the Lord guided that basket, protected that basket, and took it to a new place where it brought great change. He brought great change, not only to that nation, but to generations. In the same way, we have to be willing to give up our babies, to place them in the hands of God, for God to direct them into a future destiny that will transform this nation. And so that is my encouragement to every single person out there. What you hold will never multiply, but when you put it in the hands of God, it always multiplies.
Oh, that's such a good word, Joel. That reminds me of, there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Buford who was kind of like the spiritual grandfather of Exponential, and he once famously said, I want my fruit to grow on other people's trees. And that being like the image of what it means to be a kingdom leader, of actually like seeing the fruit born of years and labor and all that kind of stuff, but actually gifted to others and to the next generation. And what a wonderful image that is. Joel, you're clearly, obviously, apostolic in nature as a leader who has got a national perspective, and I guess you would have been around long enough to know that sometimes, particularly when we've got big vision, big ambition, we want to change the nation, we want to change the globe for the kingdom. Of course, with that, there can be a shadow side to that. And unless we're careful, some of those things can cause us to drift. And that's, I guess, going to be one of the big things that our conference is about in August. And Dave Ferguson particularly is passionate about in the release of his new book, Multiplier. And so for you as a leader who has had a state perspective, a local perspective, a national perspective, what have been some of the practices or rhythms that have helped you stay grounded, help you stay in check when it comes to maybe not letting that shadow side of leadership catch up with you?
Yeah, okay. For me, staying grounded, well, the best thing for me is that I'm married to a very grounded woman. Sharon Chelliah is not impressed by my resume, and she helps me. She really does help me go, okay, babe, now you're home. Be husband, be father. And so that's really been my saving grace, my wife. But also, we have a family where we care for our elderly parents and who are very unwell. 2 of them live in our home. And so, it's great to be at conferences and speaking elsewhere and on pulpits, but then you come back home and it's back to normal life. And I think that's a very good thing. I think that's a very grounding thing. I think the other big thing is that we are passionately serving in a local church. That has really helped us. And so, when you're in a local church and you're serving a local church, you're doing funerals, you are helping set up stuff and pack down stuff. And those things are really, really important to help you realize that everything you do is supposed to be for the glory of God and must have that servant nature attached to it. Otherwise, you sort of, you lose what you've been given to steward.
Yes. And I think, Joel, that kind of really dovetails well in with what I'd love to focus on now, because one of the things that's become, I definitely associate with you as both a friend, but also as a leader in our nation. One of the things that you're very passionate about is marriage and family. And of course, that's something that is you speak often about. You often speak at other churches, conferences, particularly around the importance of healthy marriage and healthy family. And often I think in our head we can sometimes almost separate those things on the flip side of multiplication or on the flip side of leadership. But actually, they're so integral and foundational to what it means to be a healthy leader. I wonder if you just speak to that, how that's played out in your life, why that's been so significant for you. I would love to just kind of give some of our listeners an insight on some of the practices you have around that.
Yeah. Look, I just honestly believe, I have a revelation that God never meant us to sacrifice our marriage and our families for the kingdom's sake. That's not his plan ever. In fact, the church, our first church, is our marriage and our household. And so if we're ever doing anything for the kingdom, it should be to build great marriages, because that honors God, and healthy children that love Jesus and the church, because that honors God. And the overflow of what happens in my household around my dining table is what will end up flowing into the church and impacting the community. So it's no good for me to be a brilliant preacher and be a shocking husband. I feel that disqualifies me. And the Bible is very, very clear about that time and time again. And to the point where God will not even answer our prayers if we don't look after our wives well. And so I think it's really important that we go, let's put first things first. My personal devotions with the Lord is number one. Then my next priority is my wife, followed by my children. And if I don't get to see all the great things in my lifetime, it's okay, because God's got a generational mindset. And what I don't get to walk in, I believe my children or my children's children will walk in. So with that sort of mindset, I stop myself from burning out and stressing and pushing too hard. I want to enjoy what God has given me. I want to enjoy this life. I see too many pastors not enjoying this life. And I feel like that doesn't really give honor to God.
Yeah, wow. What then, Joel, would you say could be threats to, I guess, that approach to healthy marriage, healthy family life? What can be the things that I guess can get in under the hood of our life and get into the engine that really kind of can disrupt and kind of be barriers to actually living in that flourishing life?
I think a lot of leaders, we get confused between the will of God and the kingdom of God and actually dealing with our own ego. And so some of the driven nature is, we say we're going to do it for the kingdom. We're revival at all costs. Firstly, that's not biblical. It's not revival at all. He paid it all. He gave it all so that, we wouldn't have to then lose our families and our marriages and our salvation because he's the savior, we're not. But sometimes we get mixed up. This drive that we think is godly is actually not godly. It's actually about wanting to achieve, wanting to be accepted, wanting our peers to acknowledge us, our growth. And what we can do is if we don't deal with that, we will constantly be driving our families, our churches to the point point where they will burn out, we will burn out. And it's just not healthy. It's ugly. We've all seen ministers like that, but what I love is God gave me a new definition of success. And it was on a family holiday. And my three boys were walking in front of Sharon and I, and they were laughing and leaning into each other and talking. One had their arm around the other, and Sharon and I were walking behind them hand in hand. And in that moment, I felt the Spirit of God said, "This is success. I want you to look at this. I want you to put it in your head. Whatever you thought success looked like, I want to give you a new picture today. You love your wife loves you, your boys love you, they love each other, they love the house of God, and you all love Jesus. Done. That is success." And so with that new picture, it reframes everything else that we do, and so these are the KPIs, that I fall more in love with my wife tomorrow than I am today, that my boys grow in their walk with God, that I grow in my walk with God, that we love the house of God more tomorrow than we do today. That's the KPIs, and that changes everything.
I love that, Joel, and I almost just want to soundbite that, and that's just such a good, beautiful picture of what it means to both be healthy in marriage and in family. And of course, we've still all got lots of things going on around us, and yet as we fight for that picture, I think is so significant. And I guess for me, that kind of causes me to think, because one of the things that I've seen you model so well in the life of your church is I've had just small snippets and small kind of opportunities to kind of see in your world. And of course, Pastor David Storer, who's been like a spiritual father to you, who spoke at our conference last year. One of the things that is so apparent in that approach to family that you have just talked about is also what it means to model spiritual sons and daughters, to actually have a church that kind of really values that. It's not a transaction. It's not people that we can use and abuse. It's not disposable volunteers. It's actually the house of God is about spiritual sons and daughters and releasing them into their kingdom destiny. And I just wonder if you'd kind of talk a bit about how that image of family translate into what you've sought to contend for and curate in your local ministry.
Yeah, look, I think, the church is always supposed to look like a spiritual family, a spiritual household, in the Bible. And so, but some of us have grown up in a really dysfunctional household. And so we bring that dysfunction into our leadership and into our churches, where it is a transaction. People are used to help me look successful or grow my church or grow my ministry. And of course, people get burnt out and hurt by that when people hear from God to leave or to plant a church, or, it's seen as a betrayal. You say, welcome to the family, and yet there are some pastors who no longer talk to their family, who've either left the church or within the church. And so there's all this sort of, dysfunction and complexities that come from our family of origin that we bring into leadership and into the church. And we have to make sure that we have a good understanding of family so that we can actually model that in the church. And when a church models family well, when somebody leaves, you can still be in relationship with them. You can still disagree and love. You can still have lifetime relationships, with people that were once in your church. As our 20th anniversary, we realized that over the 20 years of running Centrepoint Church, we've had multiple campus pastors in our 6 different campuses now. And, we are still in relationship with every single one of them. They're either in one of our church plants, or they're still in our church, or they're very, very good friends that are coming to our anniversary party. And I feel like that is a better picture of family than you're on staff, you're off staff now, you're dead to me. We have to change this mindset, because if that's how we love one another, the world is going to look in that and go, I don't want that. But the love that God shows us is so attractive. If we can model that well, it is so attractive. And one of the biggest things that our community and society are looking for is functional, loving relationships that is different to the dysfunction that the world offers. And so I feel like if we get relationships right, I tell you what, that is going to be the most attractive evangelism. We are seeing young adults come to our church who don't believe in God, but they sense healthy relationships. And they want to be a part of it. And then they find out the reason there's wholeness is because of Jesus. And then they come to Christ. And so we've got to bring back some healthy, loving relationships in the church that are so attractive that the world cannot deny it.
It's beautiful, Joel. Such a great image. And I guess, call it a prompting of the Spirit. I'd love for you to just take a moment, particularly as we've looked at that dichotomy of ambition and what it means to be spiritual family and healthy relationships. I'd love for you to just take a moment, even just to pastor our listeners of those who may be feeling that tension. Like maybe there's this internal drive that may not be of the Lord. Maybe it is of the Lord, but maybe it's not of the Lord, and it's actually that ego. It's that fleshly desires of wanting to do great things that maybe be unprocessed pain or other things in our life. Compare it to actually, what does it mean to actually be healthy in leadership, healthy in relationship? And maybe just to pastor our listeners through, when you feel that tension, what are some of the things that you've been able to ask yourself?
Look, I think the biggest thing is if you're constantly carrying stress, you don't feel peace, then something's not right. Right? So Jesus said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And so somewhere along the way, we have taken on a yoke that he hasn't asked us to take on, because the yoke he's given us to carry is actually fitted for us. We can do it and not be weary and struggling. You know what I mean? And come to the end of ourselves constantly. And so many pastors are at the point of burnout, and they go, I said, well, I think you've taken on something that you were never meant to take on. I'm not talking about quit your job. I'm talking about some expectations. I'm talking about some roles, maybe some job description tweaks need to happen there, but also some of the internal stuff that you're expecting, that is really unrealistic, like my church has to grow, and you put that on yourself. But the truth is, God said, go and make disciples and I will build my church, so you've taken on the role of the master rather than actually being yoked with the master. So find out what are some of the yokes that you've taken on. And this is a journey. You've got to be quiet with the Lord, be still, be alone with him and go, Lord, have I taken on some yokes? Have I taken on some expectations and some responsibilities that you haven't called me to do? And then don't tell yourself that you can't change. I'm a victim, that I just have to. If I don't, no one will do it. No, that's not going to help you. Actually be deliberate to realize that you actually do have authority. You actually do have a choice. You actually can make a decision to let certain things go. Get some counseling help. Make sure you have a good Sabbath. Make sure you have time in devotions and solitude without a phone buzzing next to you. Whatever it is, put it in place. Deal with your soul. Otherwise, you're not going to end the race well.
Yes.
And we want you to. We need you to. The body needs you to end the race well, Unfortunately, I had to learn this the hard way, Charlie, because I didn't, everything I'm saying to you, I didn't put into practice. And then one day I got a diagnosis of a brain tumor in 2015. And for 18 months, I had to recover. I couldn't talk properly. I couldn't walk. I couldn't balance, So after the tumor was removed, I'm cancer-free. But, I had to relearn everything. And here's what happened. When I was forced to rest for that 18 months, our church began to grow exponentially. And so I had to realize in that moment that the church is not built around me. And even without me doing much for 18 months, this is his church. He is touching people, saving people, healing people. I'm not the Messiah. Jesus Christ is. We both have the same initials, but there's only one Messiah. And so it's so important that you get this revelation. Some of us are doing what we have not been called to do. It's time to take off that yoke and put on the very yoke he's called us to.
Wow. I'm believing that's a word in season maybe for some of our listeners, and thank you for pastoring us in that way. The final question that I'd love to ask just as we wrap our conversation together today, which has been so refreshing, and I have full anticipation as we gather together on the Gold Coast in August, but particularly zooming out and looking at Australia as a nation and all that the Lord is and wanting to do in our country. We're seeing hunger, we're seeing movement, we're seeing renewed openness. There's been wonderful signs of increase in church planting in our nation already. What are you hoping that leaders walk away from Exponential National Gathering with in their hands, in their heart? I guess what is your prayer as we gather together on the Gold Coast in August?
I think my prayer is that they believe again that God is doing a fresh work in the nation and wants them to be a part of it. They believe again, there's new faith imparted into them to believe for risky things, big things, things that they've never done before, just a fresh faith, an impartation of faith to leave that place going, you know what, we need to do something. God's going to back us up. You know, just that renewed faith. I feel like the last time I left conference, I just felt, man, we should do something. Come on, let's get going. Time is short. Jesus is coming back. The gospel needs to be preached, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. Let's just do something great for God this year, you know, and I just praying for that for every single person that comes to conference.
So great, Joel. Well, it's been an absolute blessing to connect today, to hear some of your heart, and particularly whet the appetite as we move towards August. Thank you for being with us, and we can't wait to see you very, very soon.
See you soon, my friend. Take care.